history lives around every corner, and almost every building seems to have a ghost story attached to it. But unlike many of those legends,
Because real life is messy, right? People fight, people reconcile, people struggle. Unfortunately, sometimes the struggles end in unimaginable ways. The police received a disturbing phone call from the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel stating that a body had been found on the roof.
it was later noted that the limbs appeared to be seasoned.
He was going to meet her. That is very gross.
It didn't take long before whispers really started spreading. Someone heard footsteps, another claimed to feel like an overwhelming sadness inside. Before we begin tonight's episode, we'd like to give a quick content warning. This episode discusses domestic violence, homicide, suicide, addiction, paranormal claims, and surrounding a real tragedy. Our goal is to tell the story respectfully while separating documented facts from local legend. So please listen with care. Some stories refuse to fade.
Some places never seem to let go of the past.
From haunted locations
To unsolved mysteries
true crime,
and everything that keeps us wondering after the lights go out.
You're listening to
Married to Mysteries.
I'm Brandy.
And I'm Nick.
That's my husband.
That's my wife.
Tonight we're taking you to one of America's most fascinating cities, New Orleans. It's a place where music pours into the streets, and history lives around every corner, and almost every building seems to have a ghost story attached to it. But unlike many of those legends that stretch back hundreds of years, today's story begins in 2006. And it's not about pirates or vampires or Civil War soldiers. It's actually about two young people who fell deeply in love, but whose lives slowly unraveled, and whose names have become permanently connected to one of the most disturbing crimes in modern New Orleans history. Their names were Zach Bowen
and Addy Hall.
And then depending on who you ask, this is either one of the saddest true crime stories ever to come out of the French Quarter, or one of the most haunted locations. Tonight, we're going to explore both.
Yeah, and I've always thought like New Orleans almost feels like another world, right?
Yeah.
Like you can walk on one street, hear live jazz, and turn to the corner and someone is like telling ghost stories. It just feels like there's spirits all around. It's one of those cities where history doesn't just exist, it's everywhere around you.
Yeah, exactly. The French Quarter really is so beautiful during the day. Like the artists will fill Jackson Square, street musicians play on nearly every corner, tourists crowd all around the sidewalks like carrying coffee and beignets. But when the sun goes down, everything changes. The gas lamps begin to glow, the streets grow quieter, and the old buildings seem even louder. And then suddenly, it's easy to understand why so many people believe that the city is haunted. And some of those buildings have survived fires, yellow fever, epidemics, wars, hurricanes, and centuries of tragedy. So when something horrific happened inside one of the apartments in 2006, people started just naturally asking, like, did something stay behind?
And before we talk about the crime, we had to talk about the people, right? Because before Zach Bowen became a headline, he was simply someone's son, someone's friend, someone who people genuinely enjoyed being around. And friends describe Zach as charismatic, funny, easy to talk to. He served in the United States Army and was deployed to Iraq. And military service can change people in ways that aren't always visible.
Mhm.
And while we should never assume, it might explain his later actions. And several friends of his later will said that Zach seemed different after returning home. He eventually settled in New Orleans and found work bartending, like so many people in the French Quarters in their hospitality scene.
Mhm.
His life around revolved around late nights, music, restaurants, and parties.
And if you've ever worked in that industry, you know it almost becomes like a little family. Everybody knows everybody. You work until 2 or 3 in the morning, and then everybody just kind of like hangs out after work. It's very easy to lose track of normal routines. Unfortunately, this is also a culture where alcohol and drugs can really become part of the daily life. Then there was Addie Hall. Friends remembered her as artistic, creative, free spirited, and just incredibly funny. She loved paintings, New Orleans. She worked in bars all around the French Quarter and quickly became known by people throughout the neighborhood because she had this really big personality that people just gravitated toward her, like Zach. She also loved nightlife, music, culture, and she just loved the city itself.
One thing you'll notice when reading interviews with friends is how often people smiled when describing Addie Hall.
Mhm.
Even years after her death, like that really tells you something. She made an impression on people.
Mm. Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons this case hurt the New Orleans community so deeply, because she was really beloved in the community. These weren't they weren't just strangers. They were familiar faces, like they were probably family to some.
No one knows exactly when Zach and Addie met, but everyone agrees that their relationship moved really quickly, very quickly. Friends often describe them as inseparable. They lived together, they worked similar hours, they shared the same friends. If you spent enough time on the French Quarter, you probably saw them together. There were just too many people, but to many people, they look like the perfect couple.
But sometimes the relationships that burn the brightest also burn the fastest.
Hmm.
And looking back, friends would later describe their relationship filled with highs and very low lows.
Mm.
Big argument, passionate makeups, then another fight. It became a cycle.
And then everything changed in August of 2005. Hurricane Katrina really devastated the Gulf Coast. And after the levees failed, much of New Orleans just flooded. Entire neighborhoods were disappeared underwater. Hundreds of thousands of people evacuated, and it remained one of the worst natural disasters in American history. But remarkably, the French Quarter really escaped this catastrophic flooding.
That meant something really unusual happened,
Hmm.
where while much of New Orleans was empty, the quarter slowly came back to life, the French Quarter.
Hmm.
Restaurants reopened, bars reopened, and Zach and Edie stayed.
Hmm.
Despite the mandatory orders to evacuate, they still stayed behind. Their relationship became strongest right after the storm as they embraced their temporary new life together.
Hmm.
And they were also both big personalities. They loved attention, and eventually they became a well-known couple in the area, as they were even featured in the New York Times for staying back behind. And there's many photographs of them smiling together in empty cities, in the newspapers and stuff. And for a brief time, they became symbols of resilience. It's heartbreaking because when you see these pictures of them now, you know how their story ends, and it's really tragic.
Unfortunately, life after Katrina wasn't easy. There was stress, financial problems, heavily drinking, and drug use. And all of it became an enormous pressure on their relationship. Friends later remembered more frequent arguments, more emotional outbursts, and more instability. Many people didn't really realize that they were witnessing warning signs. They simply saw two young people who were really trying to make it work, but no one imagined where the story was heading.
And that's the part that always stays with me. We often look backwards after tragedies and think The signs were obvious, but they obviously weren't.
Mhm.
Because real life is messy, right? People fight, people reconcile, people struggle. Unfortunately, sometimes those struggles end in unimaginable ways. And that's what happened in this story, as we'll get to.
Yeah, when we tell stories like this, it's tempting to look for one defining moment, like an argument or a decision or one event that just like really changed everything. But in real life, it's really not that simple. By the fall of 2006, Zach and Addie's relationship had become increasingly unstable. Friends later described a cycle of affection followed by explosive arguments, with alcohol and drug use really making an already volatile situation even more unpredictable. Exactly what happened between them during those final days is something only the two of them truly know. Now, what investigators were able to reconstruct comes from the physical evidence, such as Zach's own confession and witness statements, and everything else is really just pure speculation.
Yeah, and that's something you'll hear us say a lot in this show, right? There's a difference between a documented fact and pure speculation. And also, pure speculation are basically rumors that grow over time.
Mhm.
And especially in a case that's become almost legendary, such as this case, tonight just gonna stick to what investigators were actually able to establish and not based off speculation.
Yeah. Sometime in late September 2006, an argument inside their apartment turned incredibly violent.
And what happened next is really hard to make any sense of.
On October the 5th, 2006, Zach drove to the parking garage of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. Days later, he would leave a note and a gruesome scene.
Yep. So on October 17th, 2006, the police received a disturbing phone call from the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel stating that a body had been found on the roof of the parking garage. It was clear that the man had either jumped or fallen to his death. He was identified by his army dog tags as Zach Bowen, and in his pocket there was a note with the address of the apartment and the instructions on where to find documentation on both, Zach and Addy, as well as his full confession to everything was on the note as well. And after finding it, police sped to the scene. They were confronted by one of the worst scenes they've ever seen, and one that they'll never be able to forget.
In his letter, Zach explained that he'd always known that he was a terrible person, and his actions had always scared him. He said that he knew that he had to take his own life in order to pay for the one that he took. But in several days between, he intended to enjoy the last days on Earth with good food, good drugs, good strippers, and good friends.
And that note is really what turned this from a missing person situation into a homicide investigation almost immediately.
Mm.
Without the note, people may not have discovered what had happened for much longer.
Exactly. After receiving Zach's confession, officers entered the apartment. Inside, they confirmed that Addie Hall had been killed. The apartment immediately became the center of one of the most shocking homicide investigations New Orleans had seen in years. News spread quickly and throughout the city. People who had known Zach and Addie really struggled to reconcile the couple they remembered with these unimaginable events investigators had uncovered. Now, coworkers were stunned and friends were devastated, but many just simply could not believe what was going on.
Like, just imagine working beside someone one week, laughing with them, joking with them, sharing drinks after work, and then seeing their face on every television station just a couple of days later. That's really what happened here. This wasn't some distant case. It hit the French Quarter community really personally because, remember, there were big figures in this community.
Yeah. So upon her return to the apartment, Zach, in his own words, calmly strangled her until she died.
And he violated her corpse several times that night and headed off to work the next morning as though it was a normal day.
Yeah. And despite the already horrible scene, it continued to get worse as the days went by. Zach had eventually used a knife and a hacksaw to dismember Addie, putting her head in one pot on the stove and her feet and hands in the other, then her torso in the refrigerator, and her arms and legs in a roasting pan on the oven. It was later noted that the limbs appeared to be seasoned, and there were diced potatoes, carrots found on the counter next to the stove.
Wow, jeez. He was going to eat her. That is very gross.
Yeah,
But all in all, Zach ended up spending 4 days with the murdered, dismembered body of his girlfriend, Addie Hall.
yeah, right. And later, friends would reveal that he seemed in good spirits and even like really happy during this time. Nobody noticed that anything was off with him.
That's super strange and
Yeah.
suspicious. And that is a gruesome death, and the details are really disturbing.
Hmm.
But police did conclude that Zach Bowen killed Addie based off the confession and everything in the note.
Hmm. So after Addie's death, the apartment remained closed. Neighbors didn't realize the horror that had unfolded inside, but outside, life in the French Quarter continued. Tourists walked the streets, music echoed from the Bourbon Street, and restaurants served dinner. Meanwhile, inside one apartment, a tragedy remained undiscovered. Investigators later determined that Zach stayed at this apartment for several days. During that time, he slowly started to withdraw from the people around him. Friends became concerned after they reached out to either of them, but no one could imagine what had already happened.
Pretty crazy. And I've read interviews with people who knew them.
Hmm.
And one thing comes up over and over again is confusion.
Hmm.
People thought that maybe the couple had just left town or they wanted some space. They never expected what the truth could be.
Hmm. Whenever something like this happens, people naturally start asking why. Like, was it addiction? Was there a mental illness? Was there trauma? Maybe some stress? Or maybe even like a combination of all those things. The truth is, there's no one single answer. Human behavior is incredibly complicated. While friends believe that Zach had changed after returning from the military service, and many even described increasing substance abuse in the relationship, none of those factors alone explain why this tragedy really occurred. Most people who struggle with trauma or addiction never become violent. It's important not to reduce a complex case just to that single cause.
Right, exactly. It's easy to want a simple explanation because simple explanations feel comforting,
Hmm.
but life doesn't always give us one. Sometimes all we can honestly say is something terrible happened,
Hmm.
and the people left behind are the ones forced to carry those answers that'll never come.
Once the investigation ended, the attention slowly shifted not just to Zach and Addie, but to the apartment itself. The building sits on one of the oldest neighborhoods in America, a place that's already famous for ghost stories, legends, and unexplained experiences. So it didn't take long before whispers really started spreading. Someone heard footsteps, another claimed to feel like an overwhelming sadness inside. Others refused to go near the apartment after learning that something had happened there. Were these really paranormal experiences, or were they the natural result of just knowing that a true terrible crime had just occurred? And that's where this story really begins to blur the line between fact and folklore.
And honestly, I think that's why this case refuses to disappear. It's not just because of the crime. I mean, it obviously is, but it's not just because of it. It's because it happened in New Orleans. If this exact same tragedy had happened in an ordinary apartment complex somewhere else, it probably wouldn't have become one of the city's most talked about ghost stories.
Mhm.
But in the French Quarter, where history and legend already walk hand in hand, people started wondering, did something remain?
Mm, exactly. So, when a tragedy happens in a place already known for its haunted history, the questions usually begin almost immediately. Like, did something change? Did the violence leave something behind? Or are people just simply responding to the emotional weight of what happened there? In the years following Zach and Addie's deaths, their apartment became more than just like a scene of the crime. It became part of New Orleans, the folklore.
Yeah, and that's honestly fascinating to me. Most murder cases eventually fade from public conversation.
Mm.
People remember the headlines and then they move on. But this one didn't. Nearly 20 years later, people are still talking about the case.
Mhm.
Not just because of what happened, but because of where it happened, New Orleans.
Mm. It wasn't long before stories really started spreading among the locals. Some people claimed that they felt this overwhelming sadness inside the apartment, while others described footsteps that no one else was there. Some reported opening and closing of doors, while others claimed to hear whispers from coming from the empty rooms. As with many ghost stories, it's difficult to determine exactly where some of these reports really began. Some originated with the local residents, and then others are from the tour guides. Some appeared years later in books and documentaries and podcasts and online forums. And like any legend, the story just continued to evolve with every storytelling.
Yeah, and that's something people don't always talk about. Ghost stories, they grow.
Hmm.
One person says they heard footsteps, next person will say they heard footsteps as well and saw a shadow. Then someone else says they heard a voice. Pretty soon, it's almost impossible to know which stories come from actual first-hand experiences and which this all it all makes the legend grow.
One of the most common claims that really involve shadow figures. Witnesses have described a dark human shaped silhouette standing in the doorway or moving quickly through a hallway before disappearing. Shadow figures really are just reported with in haunted locations all over the world, and some paranormal investigators believe they're manifestations of spirits, while others believe that they're caused by like lighting conditions, peripheral vision, fatigue, or just something called pareidolia.
Paradoilia?
Pareidolia?
Paradolia?
Pareidolia?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's where our brain's tendency to recognize like familiar shapes in incomplete visual information.
And I've got to admit, if I walked into an apartment knowing a terrible crime happened there, like a murder, my brain would probably be on high alert. Every shadow would make me stop, look twice.
Mm,
That doesn't mean people are making things up. It just shows how powerful our minds could be.
that
Because
is true.
once we're in a state of being frightened,
Mhm.
every little thing is heightened.
Yeah, several paranormal investigators have visited locations connected to Zach and Addie's story. Some claimed to capture on the EVPs, the electronic voice phenomena. It's this idea is simple that investigators leave audio recorders running, asking questions into an empty room, and then later, when they listen back, hoping to hear voices that weren't heard during the investigation. Now, supporters believe these recordings may be communications from the spirits, but skeptics argue that random sounds, radio interference, or simple like audio distortion are often mistaken for voices. But to date, there's no EVP recordings connected to this case that have been scientifically verified, of course.
And honestly, that's where I land with a lot of paranormal evidence. I don't dismiss people's experiences, but I also don't think every unexplained sound automatically means a ghost. Sometimes the mystery is simply that we don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Today, thousands of visitors take ghost tours through French Quarter every year. I took a ghost tour and a vampire tour through French Quarter. Now, some guides do mention Zach and Addie, while others choose not to. Many feel like the tragedy is just too recent. It's like too painful to really turn into entertainment. And those who do tell the story often focus on the apartment's reputation, the feeling of dread, cold spots, unexplained noises, and visitors who felt like they were just being watched. Whether those experiences are supernatural or psychological really just depends on entirely who you ask.
I've actually heard people say the energy changes just standing outside the building.
Mm,
Now, is that something paranormal is happening, or because they know the history of it?
mm,
That's the $1 million question of it all.
hmm I think that's really what makes this case different is because it's not really about ghosts. It's about grief. It's about those trying to make sense of something that doesn't really make sense. Humans naturally search for meanings after a tragedy, and sometimes that meaning comes through like religion or science, and sometimes it's through folklore, but sometimes it's also through these ghost stories.
That's really interesting, and it makes sense because if we're being honest, the idea that someone simply disappeared from the world forever, it's hard for people to accept.
Mhm.
So, ghost stories, whether they're true or not, it often becomes a way of processing loss.
People often ask us, "Do you believe that this apartment is haunted?" And my answer is always the same. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't explain someone else's experience, but I also think that extraordinary claims really deserve careful investigation.
Yeah, and I feel pretty much the same way. I love hearing paranormal stories, I love investigating them, but I also think it's important to separate documented facts from assumptions.
Mhm.
And in this case, the facts are already heartbreaking enough. We don't need any more exaggerations or assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. Before we end tonight's episode, we want to remember Addie Hall. It's easy for stories like this to become known only because of the crime, but Addie was much more than the worst thing that happened to her. She was an artist, she was a daughter, a friend, and someone who really made people laugh, someone who mattered, and that's how she really deserves to be remembered.
And while Zach Bowen's actions forever changed countless lives, they didn't erase the person many people once knew. Cases like this reminds us that human beings are complicated. Life isn't divided into heroes and villains. Sometimes it's a story of addiction, trauma, poor choices, and devastating consequences. That doesn't excuse what happens, but it reminds us how complicated these tragedies really are.
Whether you believe this apartment is haunted or believe every strange experience has a logical explanation, one thing is certain: the events that unfolded here were tragically real. And behind every ghost story, there's often a human story just waiting to be remembered.
So, on that note, what do you think? Is the apartment haunted? Are the stories simply folklore? Or is there something science still can explain? Let us know your thoughts, and we love to hear them.
If you loved today's episode, please subscribe wherever you're listening. Leave us a review and share this episode with someone who also loves some true crime, history, or even the paranormal. It really helps our show grow.
And if you have a mystery that you like us to cover, send it our way. Who knows? We might be featured in a future episode, like we did.
Yeah, like before. All right, thank you so much for watching, and you have a great day.
And remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones rooted in real history.
Mhm.
It's married to mysteries.
Bye bye.
Bye.